Part 1, Chapter 5, Reading 3 of Oblomov by Ivan Alexandrovich Goncharov, translated by C.J. Hogarth. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kevin Davidson. After tea, everyone took up some minor occupation or another. One man repaired to the riverside and strolled along the brink, kicking pebbles into the water as he did so. Another took a seat in a window and followed with his eyes each passing occurrence. Should a cat cross the courtyard or a jackdaw fly by, the watcher scanned both the one and the other, and turned his head to right and to left in order to do so. In the same way will dogs spend whole days at a window, their heads thrust into the sunlight, and their gaze taking stock of every passer-by. The mother took little Ilya's head in her hands, drew it down into her lap, and combed his hair with a gentle caress, inviting her maids to admire him. She talked concerning his future, and preordained for him the hero's part in some splendid epic. For their part, the maids foretold for him mountains of gold. At length dusk began to draw in. Once more the fire crackled in the kitchen, and the clatter of knives became audible. Supper was being prepared. Meanwhile the rest of the servants gathered at the entrance gates, and thence came sounds of laughter and of music and the playing of gorelki. The sun had sunk behind the forest, yet still was sending forth its rays in a fiery, faintly warm streak, which, as it passed over the surface of the tree-tops, touched to gold the tips of the pines. Finally these rays successively expired until only a solitary beam could be seen, fixed needle-like in a cluster of boughs before going to join its comrades. Objects then began to lose their outline, and the scene to become blurred in first greyness, then a blank almost of total obscurity. The songs of birds grew fainter, then ceased altogether, save for one persistent singer, which, as though disagreeing with its fellows, continued to break the silence with intermittent warbling. Presently it, too, took to uttering its song at rarer intervals, and to whistling with more feeble insistence, until finally it breathed a last soft-drawn note, gave a flutter or two which gently stirred the foliage around it, and fell asleep. After that all was silent, save that some crickets were chirping in chorus and against one another. A mist was rising from the earth and spreading over lake and river. Like everything else, the latter had sunk to rest, and though something caused it to splash for a last time, the water instantly resumed its absolute immobility. In the air a dampness could be detected, and the air itself would be felt growing warmer and warmer. Amid it the trees looked like groups of monsters, and when suddenly something cracked in the weird depths of the forest, it might have been thought that one of those monsters had been shifting its position, and with its foot had snapped a dry bough in doing so. Overhead the first star could be seen, glowing like a living eye, while in the windows of the house were a few twinkling lights. The hour of nature's most solemn, all-embracing silence had arrived, the hour when the creative brain can work at its best, and when poetic thought seethes most ardently, and when the heart flames with the greatest heat of passion or with the greatest poignancy of grief, the hour when the cruel soul ripens to a maximum of strength and composure as it meditates evil, the hour when, at Oblomovka, everyone settled down to a night of profound, calm restfulness. "Let us go for a walk," said little Ilya to his mother. "God bless the child!" she cried. "How can we go for a walk? It is now damp, and you would get your little feet wet. Besides, we should find it dreadful out of doors, for at this hour the wood goblin is abroad, and he carries off little boys." "To what place does he carry them? And what is he like? And where does he live?" asked the child, whereupon the mother gave full rein to her unbridled fancy. As she did so, the child listened with blinking eyes until at length, on sleep completely overcoming him, the nurse approached, took him from his mother's lap, and bore him to bed, with his head hanging over her shoulder. "Another day is over, praise be to God," said the inmates of Oblomovka, as, yawning, they made the sign of the cross, and then retired to rest. Well spent it has been, and God send that to-morrow be like it. Glory, O Lord, to Thee this night. Glory, O Lord, to Thee. Oblomov dreamed a second dream. On a long winter's evening he was pressing close to his nurse, and she was whispering of some unknown country where neither cold nor darkness were known, and where miracles took place, and where rivers ran honey and milk, and where no one did anything the year round, and where only good boys like Ilya Ilyitch himself walked day by day in company with maidens such as neither tongue nor pen could hope to describe. Also, the nurse said, there dwelt a kind witch, who sometimes revealed herself to mortals in the shape of a pikefish. And this witch singled out as her especial favourite a quiet, inoffensive boor, who formerly had been the butt of his fellows, and for some unknown reason heaped him with her bounty, so that always he possessed plenty to eat, and clothes ever ready to wear, and ended up by marrying a marvellous beauty whose name was Militrisa Kirbitievna. The nurse related the story, and the child, with alert eyes and ears, hung upon her words. So artfully did the nurse or tradition eliminate from the story all resemblance to everyday life, that the boy's keen intellect and imagination, fired by the device, remained enthralled until, years later, he had become even to man's estate. As a matter of fact, the tale which the nurse thus lovingly related was the legend of the fool Emmer, that clever, biting satire upon our forefathers, and, it may be, also upon ourselves. True, in proportion as he grew up, little Oblomov came to learn that no such things as rivers of honey and milk, or even such persons as kind witches, really existed. Yet, though he came to smile at his nurse's stories, that smile was never wholly sincere, since always it would be accompanied by a sigh. For him the legend confounded itself with life, and unconsciously he found himself regretting that the legend differed from life, and that life differed from the legend. Involuntarily he would dream of Militrisa Kirbitievna, and feel attracted towards the country, whereof nothing was known except that folk there went for walks, and were free from sorrow and care. Never could he rid himself of a longing to spend his days in lying upon the stove, even as the favourite of the legend had done, and to be dressed in ready-made, unearned clothes, and to eat at the expense of a benevolent witch. To the same story had his father and his grandfather listened, as, shaped according to the stereotyped version current throughout antiquity, it had issued from the mouths of male and female nurses through the long course of ages and of generations. Then Oblomov's nurse proceeded to draw another picture for the imagination of her charge. That is to say, she told him of the exploits of the Russian Achilleses and Ulysses, and of the manner in which those heroes had been used to wander about Russia and to kill and slay, and of how once they had disputed as to which of them could best drain a beaker of wine at a draught. Also she told the boy of cruel robbers, of sleeping princesses, and of cities and peoples which had been turned to stone. Lastly, she passed into Russian demonology, to dead folk, to monsters, and to werewolves, with a simplicity yet a sincerity worthy of Homer, with a lifelike similitude of detail, and a power of clear-cut relief that might have vied with the great Greek poets. She fired the boy's intellect and imagination to a love for that Iliad which our heroes founded during the dim ages, when man had not yet become adapted to the sundry perils and mysteries of nature and of life, when still he trembled before werewolves and wood demons, and sought refuge with protectors like Aleshka Popovitch, and from the calamities which surrounded him, when air and water and forest and field alike were under the continued sway of the supernatural. Truly, the life of a mortal of those days must have been full of fear and trembling, seeing that, should he but cross his threshold, he stood in danger of being devoured by a wild beast, or of having his throat cut by a brigand, or of being despoiled of his all by a Tatar, or of disappearing from human ken without trace left. Again, celestial portents would be seen in the shape of pillars and balls of fire, while over a freshly made grave a light would glow, and some one would seem to be walking through the forest with a lantern, and laughing horribly, and flashing bright eyes amid the gloom. And in man's own personality much that passed his understanding would also take shape and materialize. No matter how long or how righteously a man might have lived, he would suddenly start babbling, or shout aloud in a voice not his own, or go wandering o' nights in a trance, or involuntarily begin beating and assaulting his fellows. And just at the moment when such things happen a hen would crow like a cock, and a raven would croak from the gable. Consequently, feeble mankind, peering tremblingly at life, sought in its own imagination, its own nature, a key to the mysteries which surrounded it. And it may be that the immobility, the inertia, the absence of all active passion or incident or peril which such a retired existence imposed upon man led him to create in the midst of the world of nature another and an impossible world, in which he found comfort and relief for his idle intellect, explanations of the more ordinary sequences of events, and extraneous solutions of extraordinary phenomena. In fact, our poor forefathers lived by instinct, neither wholly giving rein to, nor wholly restraining their volition. They found themselves either naively surprised at or overcome with terror by the evils and the misfortunes which befell them, and resorted for the causes of these things to the dim, dumb hieroglyphics of nature. In their opinion, death might come of carrying a corpse from a house head foremost instead of with feet in front, and a fire be caused by the fact of a dog having howled 3 nights running beneath a window. Hence always they were at pains to remove a dead person feet foremost, though continuing to eat the same quantity of food as before, and to sleep on the bare ground, while with regard to a howling dog, always they drove away the animal with blows, though continuing to scatter sparks broadcast over tender, dry floors. To this day the Russian, though surrounded by a stern, unimaginative world of reality, loves to believe the seductive tales of antiquity, and long will it be before he will have been weaned from that belief. In the same way as little Oblomov listened to his nurse's legends concerning the golden fleece, the great cassowary bird, and the cells and secret dungeons of the enchanted castle, he became more and more fired to the idea that he too was destined to become the hero of doughty deeds. Tale succeeded to tale, and the nurse pursued her narrative with such ardour and vividness and attractiveness of description that at times her breath choked in her throat, for she too half believed the legends which she related, so that during the telling of them her eyes would shoot fire, her head shake with excitement, and her voice attain an unwonted pitch, while the child, overcome with mysterious horror, would press closer and closer to her side, and have tears in his eyes. Whether the narrative treated of dead men rising from the tomb at midnight, or of victims languishing in slavery to a monster, or of a bear with a wooden leg which went roaming the villages and farms in search of the natural limb which had been chopped from its body, the boy's hair bristled with fear, his childish imagination alternately seethed and froze, and he experienced the harassing, the sickly sweet process of having his nerves played upon like the strings of an instrument. When his nurse repeated the words of the bear, "Creak, creak, wooden leg, I have visited every village and farm, and I have found all the women asleep save one, who is now sitting on my back and searing my flesh and weaving my coat into cloth," when also the bear entered the right hut, and was just getting ready to pounce upon the true ravisher of his natural leg, why then the boy could stand it no longer, but, trembling and whimpering, flung himself into his nurse's arms with tears of terror, yet also with a laugh of joy to think that he was not in the clutches of the bear, but sitting on the stove couch beside his old guardian. Full of strange phantoms was his mind, and fear and grief had sunk deep and possibly for ever into his soul. Mournfully he gazed about him, and saw that everything in life was charged with evil and misfortune. And as he did so, he would keep thinking of the magic country where neither cruelty, nor noise, nor grief existed, and where Militrisa Kirpitevna lived, and where folk were fed and clothed for nothing. Not only over the Oblomovkan children, but also over the Oblomovkan adults did this legend exercise a lifelong sway. Every one in the house and the village alike, from the Baron and his wife down to the blacksmith Taras, became a trifle nervous as evening drew on, seeing that at that hour every tree became transformed into a giant, and every bush into a robber's den. The rattle of a shutter, the howl of the wind in the chimney, caused these folk to turn pale. At Epiphany tide not a man or a woman of them would go out of doors after 10 o'clock at night, and never during the season of Easter would any one venture o' nights into the stable, lest there he should be confronted by the domovoi, by the horse demon. At Oblomovka everything was believed in, including even ghosts and werewolves. Had you informed an inmate of the place that a haycock was walking about in the fields, he would have believed it. Had you spread abroad a rumour that, say, a certain sheep was not a sheep at all, but something else, or that Martha or Stepanida had become turned into a witch, the company would therefore have walked in terror both of the sheep and of the maidservant. Never would their heads have thought it necessary to inquire why the sheep had ceased to be a sheep, or why Martha or Stepanida had become turned into a witch. Rather, these credulous folk would have thrown themselves upon any doubter, so strong was Oblomovka's belief in supernatural phenomenon. Later, little Oblomov came to see that the world is ordered on a simple plan, and that dead folk never rise from the tomb, and that no sooner do giants appear than they are clapped into booths, as robbers are cast into prison. Yet, though his actual belief in such marvels vanished, there remained behind a sediment of terror and of unaccountable sadness. Nothing was to be apprehended from monsters, that he knew full well, but always he stood in awe of something which seemed to be awaiting him at every step, and if left alone in a dark room, or if fated to catch sight of a corpse, he would tremble with that sense of oppressive foreboding which his infancy had instilled into his very being. Inclined of a morning to laugh at his fears, of an evening his countenance paled again. End of Part 1, Chapter 5, Reading 3. Recording by Kevin Davidson. www.blogordie.com